And I thought that, well, that's really brilliant that a pastor would do this because a pastor understands what a pastor needs. Hey, Micah.
Hey, Joy, how you doing?
Good. It's so good to see you. It's been a while.
Good. I know, right? It's been a little bit. Yeah, thanks for doing this. Really appreciate it. Ford, I wanted to get your perspective on the best ways and uses that you found when you were working with your assistant through us. And then also, I thought this would be interesting because, full disclosure, you're no longer a client of Dream Support. And so, who in the world in their right mind would put like a little recording of a video who's not currently a client, who like stopped? Because I'd like to kind of show the full spectrum of things. And so I just wanted to let you kind of talk about your journey and why you came to us, what that allowed you to accomplish, and then why you're also no longer working with us in that capacity. So firstly, what brought you to Dream Support? Why did you start looking for an assistant through us?
Well, I found myself in a season where I had a person on my staff taking an extended leave of absence that was unexpected, unanticipated, and being a new startup church, I didn't have other people on my team that could fill in that gap. And so when I needed immediate help, and I didn't know how long I would need help for. And so the idea of an executive assistant, a virtual executive assistant, sounded like it could meet all of those needs for a season of time, or if we continued on, that being a possibility was nice as well. So it kind of fits just the season as a leader I found myself in, needing extra support, but not bringing on a full-time staff member. So.
Right. You didn't find us by going to Google and doing a search.
No, I met you through a pastor's group. And so I heard what you were doing. And I thought that, well, that's really brilliant that a pastor would do this because a pastor understands what a pastor needs. And so, there's lots of executive assistant, virtual assistant services out there, but that's what drew me, Micah, to reaching out specifically to you. Was I really knew that you understood like the church world, the nonprofit world, and kind of the just idiosyncrasies of that world and the needs. And so I felt comfortable as a pastor knowing you kind of understood what I was living through in that moment and could really help me find the best match for what I needed.
Right. And then, so tell me how you went from needing someone, getting someone, working with them for a while, and then you were like, oh, we're going to need to end this. How did that go for you and why was that?
Yeah. So like I said, I came to Dream Support just because I was in this unique transitional season where I had a staff member taking a leave of absence, needed somebody to help step in and fill some of that gap. But I didn't know necessarily how long that would be and if temporary would turn into permanent. And so Dream Support offered that flexibility for me. I didn't have to know the answers to those questions, but I could still get help. And that was really beneficial to me. And then once I had clarity kind of at the end of that season of time that my team member was coming back, I realized that my staff was ramping back up and didn't quite have those gaps anymore. And so that's why I was sad to end it because I really loved my executive assistant. She was fantastic. But just had a fuller team again. And so no longer had those gaps.
So you used this as sort of a bridge for a time that you were like, I'm going to need something for a time. I don't know how long that time is. If it's really great, it works out. Maybe it's longer. But then your staff member came back.
I couldn't go through the whole hiring process at that time to bring on a temporary employee. And that would have taken me months that I would have had a gap. Whereas within a few weeks, you and I were able to have conversations, match up with somebody on board and get to work immediately. And for me, time was of the essence. And so that made this process really nice too, was it didn't linger. I could get help almost immediately.
What are some of the best use cases you found when you were working with your assistant as a pastor?
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest things that I needed personal help with as a pastor was keeping up with my inbox, just the amount of people that would reach out, or you talk to people often as a pastor, in passing, on a Sunday. And so the follow-up can sometimes fall through the cracks, and I never intend for it to, but it's just natural and easy for that to happen. And so my executive assistant really helped fill in the relational gaps, kind of the logistics of relationships. Of course, I'm going to be the one to have coffee with people and set meetings with them, but she was able to facilitate all the back and forth to make sure I didn't drop the ball on getting back on an email. She could also help me prioritize not only relational contacts and people I needed to get back with sooner rather than later, more like pastoral care situations versus leadership issues or the like. But she could also just help me prioritize the requests coming in. You always have requests, and everybody's request in their mind is urgent. And so she was the one person who's really had the overarching perspective and view on and all of these people asking for time or that had needs. And so she could help me just understand that landscape and help me prioritize. Okay, this you probably actually need to respond to today. Here's where I can help you with that. And so that was immensely helpful, because there's nothing more daunting, at least for me, to open up on Monday morning that inbox, and it is just overflowing with all sorts of new things and stuff sometimes from last week that you didn't get to still on your plate. So she was very helpful with that.
That's awesome that you have that personal. I try to really not be in there during the weekend, and I try to focus on the in-person and that sort of stuff. Do you take a Sabbath, one of those on a Saturday or any day?
Usually a Saturday. I'm with my kids and my family, and that is just, I am pretty unavailable unless there's a periodic event, but then I'll, flip out a Friday. And I will say it's much easier knowing you have an assistant who is kind of keeping a mind to just the logistics of your ministry and life, because it gives you the permission to do what you know is important to do, but maybe you won't give yourself, especially as a pastor, because you always are saying, well, my work's so important. I'm not just looking over contracts, week in and week out. I'm helping build the kingdom of God and expand the mission of God in the world. So you can kind of deceive yourself that that you have to be on all the time. And so that just gave me a little bit of permission to have healthier boundaries and know that things weren't falling through the cracks. So
that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. And, we're not asking the assistants to that's constantly over the weekend in the email and things like that. But a lot of times.
Yeah. And that's something we had talked about was where could you need help? And, and then there were some days where it was if you have other things to do, because she was part-time. So it's on Thursday, I'm out anyway, or, I'm in the office, so I'm checking all these things. We kind of had worked out a rhythm of knowing it wasn't she always had to be on and I always had to be available. We kind of had worked out what a good rhythm was for us. So I kind of knew, this is when I can access and call her and vice versa. And so that was helpful to know that too, and have that open communication. So.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Now, when you mentioned she was doing some project management stuff, can you talk about that just a little bit?
Yeah. So our church, like a lot of new church starts all throughout the U.S., meets in a temporary venue space. And so there is just week in and week out, we are loading into a music hall venue, setting up church, and then tearing down afterwards. We have to reserve a parking lot with the city to provide parking for our community on Sunday. And so she could turn in those parking reservation forms. She could pay those invoices. She could, check in with the city and follow up for me. So I wasn't having to do some of that kind of administrative work that's important and has to get done. But it freed me up to do some of the things like only I could do, like writing sermons. No one else can write your sermons or give them. And so I needed to be spending more time there so she could do that sort of like project management, logistic work. There were times too, like I would have her contact my team, my staff team or my ministry area leaders. And many of them like knew who she was, knew that she would be contacting them. And so they were aware of that. And she could just remind them of things or ask them for updates on my behalf, and just keep projects moving. So it didn't take space and energy in my mind. So that was helpful.
Yeah, that's a big, the whole like brain space conversation is really big because leaders tend to internalize and constantly think about projects that are in motion or steps that need to be taken. And it just lives there until they know someone else is helping to own that. Mm-hmm. So the worst fear I feel like of any leader, and particularly pastors, at least me as a pastor, was that like if we set a plan in motion, the worst fear would be if nobody else moved their portions forward. But if you have someone who's helping to make sure, check in, report back, those sorts of things, that's really, 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 really helpful. Yeah. You also have, you've been really great because you referred another pastor to us from your network. And then you and that pastor referred a lawyer that you guys know together to us. So tell me about that. Why would you refer people to us?
Because one, it was just such an incredible help to me and blessing. I experienced such great benefit from it. I feel like I could, honestly and candidly to my friends and fellow pastors and that lawyer say, this will help you. Not, it might help you. Like it actually will.
Well, we have enjoyed, supporting you, helping when we were. Thank you for sending people our way, and also for doing this conversation and being willing to give up some time on your Friday to help us out. And hopefully we would love to help, 5 more pastors by Easter if I can. So that's kind of what I'm working on. So thank you so much, Joy. Appreciate you and what you're doing in Dallas.
You guys were truly partners in ministry. And so that has always meant so much to me. And you were always at the top of my list of people and organizations to call when I need some help continuing on in the mission. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks.